Hello there, everybody. How are you getting on there today? Thanks very much for joining us on the big debate here on the AIM2 Facebook page and the AIM2 YouTube page. We try to have these debates on a regular basis. One, to, I suppose, keep people up to date with regards the political work that we're involved in. And two, I suppose, to try and get into a discussion and a debate about a serious topic that's affecting this country. And to see can we do our best to answer questions that people might put up on the wall there as well. So if people want to ask me a question, if I see it, I'll do my best to address it if I can at all. I suppose I'll just talk about some housekeeping issues first, if I can. There's a couple of issues that have, I suppose, been happened within the party in the last while that I think it's important that we let people know of. The first one is I'd like to, I suppose, welcome and introduce AIM2's newest councillor, and that's Councillor Emmett Doyle, who is our councillor on Derry City Councillor. As you might know, our good friend and colleague Anne McCluskey stood down from that position in recent times. We knew that we would never be able to replace Anne McCluskey because she is irreplaceable, but we have a very, very good candidate selected to fulfill that role as best as possible in the Derry City area. Emmett was formerly member of Ógra Fianna Fáil and also a member of the SDLP. And indeed, in 2014, narrowly missed out on taking a seat for the SDLP in the election. Emmett comes with a lot of experience. First and foremost, he worked as a parliamentary assistant in Stormont for an SDLP MLA previously. He also works in the area of policy development now at the moment. He's got a good political focus. He stands for our core objectives, the right to life for everybody, national reunification of this country, and economic justice. And I have every confidence that he will do us proud in Derry City Council in the years in future as well. So I just want people to, I suppose, give Emmett Doyle a warm welcome to this organisation. The other thing I wanted to mention briefly, if I can, is the issue of the national draw. I'm not looking for you to buy a ticket, you'll be glad to know, at this stage, because the national draw is over. But the national draw, first of all, it's our most important fundraiser every year. And this year, we had a massive result, loads of energy coming our direction. And that's very clearly seen in the number of tickets that were bought. We sold 80% more tickets than we did last year. That's nearly twice the number of tickets that were sold last year. And we did that despite COVID, despite Cummins not being able to meet physically, etc. There was a massive deal of work done by a lot of our key activists around the country to make that happen. So many people bought tickets, both members and also supporters. And I want to aber míle buíochas the gach uileáin a cheannaigh tickets into an uair seo. Thank you very much for buying a ticket and giving us support in this national draw ticket. That money is key because we are not supported. We're not funded by the state. We're the only political party in Leinster House not funded by the state. And that money goes towards the development and the organisation of our movement. It goes to support candidates in particular constituencies, to purchase leaflets, to do videos and carry out social media work with candidates. It's about building our organisation, and like any other organisation, we need funds to do it. So thank you very much with regards to the purchase of those tickets. I also want to just mention very briefly, if I can, just an aspect about the development of our party. In these broadcasts, a lot of members who can't go to common meetings watch it, etc., and a lot of supporters. And it's important, I suppose, just to kind of also identify some level of the strategy that we're involved in to achieve our objectives. So everybody that's listening to this particular broadcast, we share the same common objectives. The right to life for everybody, unity and economic justice. Now, sometimes there's disagreements with regards to the strategy and how to achieve that, and that's fine. Disagreement is good as long as it's collegial and it's constructive in its manner. We are a broad organization, a broad church of an organization. from my strategic view is that if we were to narrow ourselves to a specific type of individual with a specific type of view, we will not be able to achieve those three core objectives that we've set out. So we want to harness the broad energy of people who can aspire to achieving those objectives. So I remember when I was told, when I first, along with others, stated that we would set up this new movement, a number of people came to us from different political parties and they scoffed at us. They laughed at us. They basically said, Pater, you know, the people that you'll gather together in your organization, you know, there'll be a motley crew of different people who couldn't fit into other political organizations in the past. And those types of people will not be able to agree on the time of day. They'll end up fighting with each other and they'll go their separate ways, and you'll fall, you know, on your butt within a couple of years. And thankfully, we have proved them wrong. For we are a broad church and there's different views, but it's really important that people keep their eye on the big picture and not sweat the small stuff. Because when people sweat the small stuff, what that does, it simply creates internal difficulties. Now, I've worked as a management consultant before I came an elected rep, and I worked at about 2,000 separate businesses over that period of time. And it was very clear to me during that period of time that you could tell a particular organization where everybody was working together, you know, coming to some level of agreement with each other, and all facing the same direction, all with the shoulders to the wheel. Because those organizations were really achieving what they had set out to achieve. And then you could tell the organizations that had that internal constant dissent, where some of the people in those businesses were faced against each other, and really most of their energy actually went into this constant internal churn. And that's obviously not what's going to be achieved. You're not going to achieve your objectives if you have that constant internal churn. So it's really important that we have people focusing in the same direction, making sure that we're trying to build the same organization. You know, yes, there are always going to be differences, but you know what? On summer's day, when the sun is shining, Aontú will have a number of TDs in the Dáil. We will have a number of MLAs in Stormont. Those individuals will want to achieve our objectives. To achieve those objectives, we're going to have to go into government. And to go into government, we're going to have to negotiate and maybe even compromise on some of our issues. And if we're sweating the small stuff now, how in the name of God are you going to achieve those big picture negotiations in the future? So a key strength, a key tool to achieve our objectives in the future is that internal discipline, that internal focus, and that's that ability to avoid distraction of small stuff. So that's just, I suppose, a small little discussion on the strategy of the organization. Just before we get on to the main topic, which is obviously the threats that golden circles bring to Ireland, and the fact that we as a party want to focus on making sure that we eradicate corruption, eradicate inner circles and golden circles in Ireland. Before that, I just want to discuss briefly an issue that I raised in the Dáil today, a very serious issue. Everybody knows, obviously, that the COVID restrictions in Ireland are the 6th most restrictive in the world, the 6th most severe in the world. And this is despite the fact that the incidence of COVID in this state is the 3rd lowest in Europe. So we have this massive contradiction in terms that we have a very low incidence of COVID, thankfully, but actually a really strict and restrictive society. Now, some people say, well, those two things are obviously related, and of course they're related, for sure. And some people say, well, it's not a good thing. Well, I'd say it's not a good thing. The reason why I'd say it's not a good thing is because all of those restrictions come at a massive cost to society, massive cost. So, for example, 150,000 people have missed cancer appointments this year. 200,000 women on the waiting list for cancer screening this year. 3,500 women phoned support services for domestic abuse so far this year that never phoned those support services before. We know that there is an epidemic of mental health issues sweeping across the country. We know also that there's a massive wiping out of small businesses in Ireland currently. 51% for the first time of retail is now online. most of that retail is leaking outside of the country, is lost to Ireland. And we know that hundreds of thousands of people have been pushed into poverty. Child poverty has increased by 24%. Now, that's not to even talk about the level of deaths and illness that are happening in non-COVID sectors due to the, one-dimensional focus on COVID at the moment. Don't get me wrong, COVID is a serious issue. We need to keep it down. We need to do the clever stuff, the simple stuff every day. But we don't need to completely lose sight of all the other really important aspects of our society. And AIM2 is the only political party that's constantly making that message. Well, today we raised another issue, and that's the fact that 50 people so far this year who were homeless have died. Absolutely shocking. We know of an individual who was released from prison, and the next day he was dead. We know of young women who are homeless committing suicide. We know of young women in their 20s who are homeless dying of drug overdoses. We know of an individual released from hospital and absolutely very tragically simply went around the corner and committed suicide, hung himself off a railing. It's shocking what's happening in our country. The supports are not there for the most vulnerable, and that's worse this year than it was last year. Last year, a total of 35 people who were homeless died, and the year before it was the same, and that's for the whole year. And yet 50 people have died so far this year, and the year is not out. And actually November and December are usually the months, because of the extreme weather, that have the severest death rate amongst the homeless. So we have called for an investigation today. Today, I use my leader's question time to call for an investigation. And thankfully, we have good news. The Department of Housing have relented to the media pressure and to the pressure we brought in the chamber and said that they will investigate the causes of those excess deaths amongst the homeless. So it is one small chink of light in a very, very dark picture currently, but it's good to know that we in AIM2 were critical in pushing for that. I want to get to the main topic of the discussion today, and that's the discussion of golden circles, inner circles, and corruption in Ireland. Why is it so important that there isn't golden circles or corruption in Ireland? Well, I'll tell you why. For decades in this country, it wasn't what you knew, it was who you knew. So in other words, if you wanted a job or a contract, or if you wanted a position, if you wanted to win a tender, all of those aspects were more tied up with who you knew than what you knew. So it meant that a small circle of politically powerful people were able to share an economic largesse, economic benefits, economic dividend to another circle of people who were just about them. And that circle, that inner circle where people made it in this country, if they knew somebody or if they had influence over somebody, was very, very corrupting. What it meant was that political parties and the political establishment and certain politicians were on the take. They were taking brown envelopes, they were filling their boots with money, while a certain number of developers, certain number of individuals were winning massive contracts. Now, that's wrong in its own right, and it's plain to see, but it also had a massive implication for the development of our society as well. Because if you are doing tenders right, if you're getting projects done and procured correctly, you'll get them done on the basis of who is the best person to do the job in the most efficient manner, at the highest quality, at the lowest cost to the state. But if you delete that system, if you build your system on grafts, on inner circles, etc., on who you know rather than what you know, it means that the prices are not the most efficient. The jobs are not the best jobs. It means that you have a higher cost to the taxpayer financially, and the taxpayer is fleeced, while there's a lower level of efficiency and a lower quality of work and infrastructure and development in the country. Now that has a long-term effect, radical long-term effect over society. Another example of the cost of inner circles are where lands are zoned, not because they're the best place to house and home people, but because certain people have those lands, and they have influence over politicians. And to be honest, there are still serious questions today with regards the rezoning of lands. And in a particular local authority in this country, we have a Aontú councillor who is calling on the local authority to make sure that there's a clear investigation with regards conflict of interest amongst the owner of lands and councillors involved in rezoning those lands. We're looking to find out, the terms of reference for that investigation, to make sure that that investigation is clear. We have a sprawling commuter belt in this country, in part because development happened on a developer-led basis. So in other words, people who had the most influence over councillors and elected representatives could buy zoning in the past, and that's wrong. And that's why so many, especially commuter belt communities, are finding it so difficult to get the services they need, the community services they need, and get proper transport and get close by to work as well. So there's a massive cost to inner circles. Now, this last couple of weeks, another inner circle has been exposed. And we've seen the former Taoiseach and the current Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, give a confidential document, not for circulation, to a friend. And by giving it to a friend, gave a material benefits to that friend. That friend at the time was a head of a doctors' union in deep competition with the existing union, the IMO, looking to, literally in their words, wipe out the IMO and steal and take those members from the IMO. This confidential document was given. Leo Varadkar told nobody that he was giving it to Dr. Matthew O'Toole. In actual fact, he didn't even tell the Minister for Health, Simon Harris, who was the minister in charge of the negotiations of the contract with the doctors in the first place. And it's incredible, some of the small bits of information that you find out around this. Dr. O'Toole, I understand, it's been alleged, created a database in which this document could be viewed, and the passwords to that database was Simple Simon. In maybe to show that the minister in charge of this had been completely undermined by the Taoiseach at the time, circumventing the minister in giving this document. So the minister told nobody. The minister left the Taoiseach told nobody, and the Taoiseach left no paper trail whatsoever. It's unbelievable. It was very clear that the Taoiseach did not want anybody to find out that this document was being given to Dr. Matthew O'Toole. Now, I asked in the Dáil, what was the motivation for the Taoiseach not to tell anybody? And the Taoiseach simply couldn't, or the current Taoiseach simply could not respond to that question. Simply could not say by publishing it was a lesser mechanism to achieve his objectives than keeping it secret. So it's very clearly that this was a confidential document given to a friend. Now, what does it take? Do we have to write confidential and not for circulation in flashing neon lights on these documents for people like Leo Varadkar to understand what exactly that means? And I think it's also very telling. It's unbelievably telling, I think, that when I asked the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach on that day, the former Taoiseach on that day, did he ever leak confidential information from the cabinet? The Taoiseach stated that's not of this nature. Now, that's an incredible situation. For a person who is in the cabinet for 10 years to state, in a matter of words, that yes, he has leaked information from the cabinet in the past, and actually qualified it and said, well, sure, doesn't everybody leak information to journalists? Fact is, no, everybody doesn't do that. It is a particular type of politics that's an endemic within Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael currently. Indeed, if you look at Twitter on any given Wednesday, you can actually see tweets, it's like a live tweet or a live stream from the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael parliamentary parties. Why is that happening, do you think? It's because those parties have become parties of personal ambition, where there's no shared objective. They're no longer teams anymore. They're individuals fighting with each other to get to be the top dog. And that's why they're all happy to leak on each other all of the time. And that's a very poor cynical type of politics. And it's clear, I remember speaking to a Fine Gael TD. I was in a car, went to a meeting with three Fine Gaelers about 7 years ago, and we're having a conversation about the next leader of Fine Gael. And the particular Fine Gael TD, who went on to become a Fine Gael minister, stated to me, Leo is grand, but he just can't pass a journalist. And what that person meant when that person said it was that Leo has built his career on leaking to journalists. And maybe, and I say this very carefully, maybe that's one of the reasons why many journalists didn't come looking for his head when he was caught red-handed leaking this confidential document. Because maybe they felt this is a person who's given us open access and will do in the future and is useful for us. It's a terrible type of politics to be involved in, and it's a politics that aim to are a million miles away. We are building a movement of people who believe so passionately in the importance of our objectives that we will work for that common goal. The common goals that we want to work for are actually more important than any of us individually. And we know that it's important to work respectfully with collegial support and making sure that we don't undermine each other in any way to achieve those particular objectives. I threw a political grenade into the political system last night. I asked the Taoiseach a question. It has come to my knowledge, at least it has been reported to me, an allegation that during the end of May, the Taoiseach had a number of friends over to a house that he was staying in, which was on the Farmley estate. At the time, he was renting it out as his abode, and he had a number of friends over to that house for drinks. Now, that was clearly against the restrictions at the time. And the person who told me this was a person who said that they knew of families who were having newborns, and those newborns couldn't meet with grandparents, that they knew of families who were burying their loved ones and they couldn't have proper funerals. And they felt aggrieved that they were in those situations. And yet the Taoiseach of the day was ignoring the restrictions that the Taoiseach had brought about, according to them, and had broken those restrictions. Now, it's interesting that Dara Cleary, Phil Hogan have had to resign for similar. The Taoiseach notably didn't answer my question last night. We will continue to put the question to the Taoiseach until he answers that question. And we will put the question to the Taoiseach to say, is he comfortable in having a Taoiseach that who has allegedly broke the restrictions last May? It's a very, very important question. So there's a number of things I think to take from this political situation. We have Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in coalition with each other. Now, Fianna Fáil have been incredible on this. When Dara Cleary was in trouble with regards to his own ministerial position, Fianna Fáil basically left him out in the cold. When Leo Varadkar is in trouble for far worse, what happened is Micheál Martin becomes riding to his rescue. They circle the wagons around him. We have on another side, people like Jim O'Callaghan and Mark McSharry, who are positioning themselves as the conscience of Fianna Fáil, crying out about it and giving out about it. Yet when they had a chance to vote on it yesterday in Leinster House, refusing to vote, a lack of confidence in the Taoiseach yesterday. The Green Party were meant to be the ethical police over these two types of old establishment parties. They had a time yesterday to crowbar some level of ethical oversight into it. They chose not to. They chose to lock themselves into this type of misgovernance into the future. And what's going to happen is that the Greens are going to pay significantly in political terms for not fulfilling their responsibility on this. This was a time where they could have laid down a marker to say that the inner circles of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael of the past is no longer acceptable and that they will have no truck with it. But they failed at their first hurdle. It's absolutely incredible. We aim to we're at the front of pushing for decency, transparency, and making sure that the system and the political system works fairly. We did our best to hold the governments to account, and we will continue to do that in the future. It's really important to believe that we have governance in this country on a fair basis, on a basis of merit, that everybody is equal in the eyes of the law, that people achieve success in this country on the basis of their character, the work that they do, and merit, that nobody has an inside track, nobody is favored by the establishment, and that nobody is using their power to give favors to anybody else. That's the politics of the past. It can no longer have a future. So that's some of the issues I see. People have sent in messages there. Tom in Tipperary said we need more honest politicians like those of the Aontú political party. Declan is glued in from the Bogside. Kieran is watching from Sligo. John Francis is looking in from Mullingar. Aoife is looking in from Ballymun. We have questions with regards COVID-19. We'll finish maybe on just a couple of ideas around COVID-19. The government is looking to push for the restrictions currently there to continue for another 3 weeks. The government, for example, is looking to keep church services closed. And this is another campaign that we in Aontú have been to the fore on. The government is looking to say to people who want to practice their religion, and remember, religious practice is a human right according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's only 3 countries in the world where religious services are actually banned at the moment, and that's Saudi Arabia, North Korea, and the south of Ireland. It's an incredible situation. They're looking to keep shops and businesses and restaurants and pubs closed up until the first week in December, which will mean that there will be a very short period of time for people to actually use those services, which means more people will be squashed into those limited locations in a shorter period of time, which actually mitigates against what they're looking to do in the first place. It doesn't make sense. Now, interestingly enough, we in Aontú have released a bill. That bill seeks a 25% reduction in the wages of TDs and senators, while there are level 4 and level 5 restrictions. We are looking also for level 3 restrictions when they include closing restaurants, pubs, shops, and cafes. Because we hear in Leinster House all the time, politicians in lofty tones throwing around the words like confetti, saying we are all in this together. But it's absolute nonsense. Because at a time where we know that people are dying on the streets, at a time where businesses are being wiped out, but at a time where children are being pushed into poverty, politicians in here are actually giving themselves pay rises. It's absolutely scandalous, and it's wrong. So we have launched a bill which seeks a 25% reduction in wages for TDs during these restrictions. If you're going to put these restrictions in place, you should know what the pain feels like with regards reduction in salary. As you can imagine, we're not very popular around here amongst a lot of the TDs for doing so, but we're not here for popularity's sake. We're here to see, can we build a better country, a better Ireland, one that has cohesion in terms of incomes and salaries, one where actually the politicians don't virtue signal on Twitter about just Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand reducing the wages of the New Zealand politicians, but actually do the same job with regards to reducing wages for politicians during restrictions in Ireland as well. We have another bill that's coming for the Dáil hopefully next week, and it's a bill which seeks to ban the provision of child pornography. Seeks to ban the provision of pornography to children in this country. Right now, children under the age of 18 can consume pornography on the internet, and there's no penalty to the people who make massive profits from this whatsoever. We have a bill which seeks to outlaw and ban that. Hopefully, it will pass first stage next week. No doubt, again, there'll be many of the establishment who will rail and fight against it. We don't mind. We'll continue on that as well. We're also hoping that we get a bill in next week for All Ireland representation. So that means elected representatives, MPs in the north of Ireland, who are Irish citizens, will be able to attend the Dáil and the Seanad to speak and to ask questions in the Dáil and the Seanad. There's nothing stopping that other than the will of the establishment down south. So that's where we are at the moment. Thanks very much for tuning in. And for those of you who have been looking on over the last while, I'd ask you to go to our website, read our policies. If those policies suit you, get off the fence, get involved. Aontú is absolutely growing at a serious pace. We have a serious opportunity now of challenging the establishment, but we need your help to do it. I also want to say right across the country, we have local area reps. So in some places we have elected representatives, in other places we have local area reps, people such as Peter Whelan, Peter Devon, Jack Lynch, just to name but a few, Becky Keeley, Paul Lawless, Mary T. Sweeney. These are individuals who are volunteering their time, working for the benefit of their communities, and building the profile of themselves and the party in their local communities. And we need you to get involved and help them as well. And I can tell you, if we can harness 10% of the goodwill that's coming to us in activism in the future, the political establishment better watch out in this country. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining in, and please God, we'll talk to you next week. Ihoa.